This was my kingdom. From the whispering trees of Harshaw Creek to the protective canyons of Patagonia, my ancestors painted the earth with their paws. Now, the ground trembles, breaching machines killing trees. Poison from the mine seeps into Sonoitas Creek, threatening every precious drop. Can I trust this water, the lifeblood of my home? They carve mountains into dust, leaving scars that bleed venom that will never heal. Our haven shrinks, leaving echoes of what once was. It will soon disappear, along with me, my friends, and my neighbors, and eventually getting to you, people of southern Arizona. But we are not ghosts yet. We are the whispers of the wind in the evergreens, the song of the river in Harshaw's heart. We will not vanish without a fight. Lend us your voice, protectors of the wild. Stand with us as we defend our mountains, our rivers, our air, our legacy. Together, we can turn their echoes into a
Anyway, you'll be seeing this on YouTube television, probably maybe some, like the bigger channels that do public service announcements, Facebook. So it's coming out in the next day or two. So just thank you very much. How about that? Yes. Okay. Emily Burns, she is the program director for the Sky Island Alliance and leads the team running all of the programs, including the Border Life Study, the Tri-National Internship Program, Sky Island Photofauna, Spring Seeker. She runs the stewardship programs and she handles communication. Do you go to bed at night? Yeah. Yeah, okay. Emily joined Sky Island Alliance in 2019 after practicing conservation. There's no accidents in the universe. Emily loves the distinct seasons in the Sky Island region and the multitude of plants, animals, and people that call this landscape home. Her hope for the Sky Islands in the next 30 years is that communities make choices that keep water flowing, native plants thriving, and wildlife safely on the move between the U.S. and Mexico border. She hopes people will stand up for unique biodiversity of the region. Emily lives in Tucson with her family, which includes 3 rescue tortoises that have been in the family for more than 30 years. When she isn't hiking around, hopefully witnessing reptiles like desert tortoises or even Gila monsters in the wild, she enjoys doing modern botanical embroidery. You know, I called Emily recently and asked her about her childhood because I think, you know, if you talk to people, the journey starts from her journey, I believe. Her mission started when she was 4 years old, or earlier maybe. She has been a concerned creature caretaker since she was about 4 years old, like bringing out her turtles and little worms. During rainstorms, she would rescue worms. And so it looks like the creatures she's caring for are now much bigger and very endangered. Please help me welcome Dr. Emily Burns.
All right, well, thank you for welcoming me here this evening. It's nice to be with a crowd of people interested in these important issues about our region. And I'm excited to talk to you about a species that we know even less about than the yellow-billed cuckoo. So the jaguar is something that really piqued my interest when I came to Arizona, but it was an idea. It was a concept. It wasn't real for me. Done a lot of work with the organization in about the last 5 years that I've been there. And jaguar was sort of this mythical kind of creation story, if you will, about why we do the conservation work we do. And we talk about something called Path of the Jaguar, which is both the literal and the just the iconic idea of the journey of a jaguar individual across the landscape. And it helps us define a sense of place, helps us think about connectivity across the region. And, you know, we all sort of hope to be part of the Path of the Jaguar that's hopefully leading to a better place for the species. And one of the things that I like to do is think about what is the jaguar doing out there in the landscape? Where is it going? What is it searching for? Is it fleeing something? Is it trying to move away from something that's repelling it? Maybe another jaguar's territory, maybe some bad development project. Or is it really just looking for love out on the landscape? But one of the things we think is very compelling for those maverick young male jaguar that have been coming up into Arizona, coming up here, I think they're coming up here to hunt. And so they're coming to look for species like this. This is white-tailed deer in the Patagonia Mountains. They are, of course, extreme predators. They are top predators in the landscape, and they hunt big game. They go for species like the white-tailed deer, javelina. They're known to eat skunks and white-nosed coati. And we have ample food sources for them up here. But where these jaguar are going exactly, the paths they're taking are unknown. These are incredibly secretive and elusive species. But then every once in a while, you have that needle in a haystack moment and you get a jaguar on camera. And this happened to us last year. This is a male jaguar that we photographed in the Whetstone Mountains. It was there in May last year and then again on Thanksgiving. And we were pretty shocked when we found it. It wasn't a camera we would expect to find jaguar on. And it's helped us understand suddenly this concept of Path of the Jaguar that we were thinking about in our conservation work, but it made it crystal clear for us. This is an animal that came up from Mexico, crossed over the US-Mexico border. It was photographed by Border Patrol in the Huachuca Mountains in spring. Then we saw it in the Whetstone Mountains in May. Where did it go during the summer? It was there again in November, and then it was back in the Huachuca Mountains in December. Where did it go after that? Where is it now? So of course, we still don't really know where Path of the Jaguar is. We don't know exactly where it's moving, but we know for sure certain that there is a north-south corridor for this individual that's being used, and that gives us a lot of excitement to do even more conservation activities in this area. So I like to say that jaguar conservation is one of the most optimistic things you can do. It's the optimistic practice of trying to maintain large, wild spaces that are connected to one another so animals can move back and forth. It's the idea of keeping clean, flowing water, not groundwater that's getting pumped out at 6 million gallons per day, but natural flows of water on the landscape. And space and habitat for the wide diversity of species that we've been talking about this evening that live here. So if we can do that, and we do right by jaguar, we provide it safe passage on the landscape, we're not just helping jaguar, we're helping all of the species, we're helping those little ones. And that's why I think keeping jaguar in mind in our conservation activities, because if we can get it right for that species, we're probably doing right by yellow-billed cuckoo and small annual plants and things like that. Of course, it's not easy, and you all know that. That's why you're here. I'm not going to belabor that point. But there are certainly challenges that are affecting jaguar, and I'm going to talk about some of those, both range-wide and here in Arizona. We're dealing with modification of the environment at sort of unprecedented scales as the number of humans on the planet is going up. We've got climate change. And so it is a rapidly changing environment to be practicing conservation and to be trying to do right by jaguar. But we want to have more moments like this, even if we don't get to see them, right? We want to know that jaguar is out there, it's thriving. We've set aside places where the resources, the things that jaguar needs to survive are there. So the conservation framework that we use and refer back to is similar to the yellow-billed cuckoo, thinking about a recovery plan for the species. And the plan was revised by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service for jaguar in 2018. And I'm going to walk you through some of the central tenets of it, and then we'll reflect on what that means for our conservation here in Arizona. One of the really important things to note is that the area that jaguar is in, the species range is expansive and it's almost not up here at all. Most of the jaguar territory is down in South America, a little bit in Central, and then in North America it's pretty constrained. Whoa, that's exciting. Up here. Okay, I'll try not to keep doing that to you too many times. That's fine. So that is what is known as the Northern Recovery Unit, and that's what we're going to focus on today. But in interpreting regulatory decisions for how ESA is handled for species like jaguar, you need to understand that the biologists that are doing those consultations are thinking about the whole range when they decide how severe the impact is. They are not thinking about it just for a specific place. And that's why the conclusions that get drawn may be different from what we might expect. So this range, this whole wide range, the Pan American Recovery Unit that has both core areas and connectivity areas has a lot to do with the future of jaguar. And so our situation is somewhat different, of course, in the Northern Jaguar Recovery Unit. So on the left-hand map, you can see where the core areas of the recovery units are for jaguar. And I can't read from that far away, so I'm going to walk over here. So we've got the Sonoran core area, doing it right now, right there. And then there's a Jalisco core area. We're way up here at the top in the borderlands. And it's considered a secondary area. We are really at the very northern end of jaguar. Of course, historically, jaguar was more prevalent and a wider distribution further north up to the Grand Canyon, but was systematically extirpated from those areas due to hunting during the 20th century. So what we have now is the secondary core area. And so how to do conservation when we're at the very edge of the range and there are not very many individuals. The right-hand map is a color map, sort of like similar to what Nick was showing. This one is actually carrying capacity. It's a model looking at how many jaguar could actually live on the landscape theoretically. And you can see more jaguar could fit in a smaller area where it's green, down in the Jalisco area, and not many are predicted to be up here under current conditions. Okay, so the Jaguar Recovery Plan did a lot of research into the conditions needed on the landscape for jaguar to thrive. And this is a list of them, and many of them may be very intuitive to you. Basically, they're saying that open spaces need to be at least 38 square miles. That's sort of the minimum patch size or landscape size that would support a jaguar. That's about 14, yeah, it's about 14 by 14, I think, the size there. So in that, what we need to have is habitat patches that have connectivity for Mexico. That is number one. The maps I just showed you, the core population is further south. So we can't have a successful population up here north of the border unless there's flow and animals are able to move back and forth. We need to make sure that there are prey species available. There has to be adequate food sources. So if there's something going wrong and there's not enough food to eat, if the prey species are being hunted at too high of a level, that's when jaguars begin to become desperate and they start to attack livestock. And so there's a clear link between natural native prey being available and a reduction in disruption to livestock and ranchers. The other thing that is really important, of course, is surface water. The jaguar plan says you just need 12 miles apart between water sources. I would wager we probably need more water than that. And certainly that is the case with springs in this area. We do tend to have water sources that are closer together, not just for jaguar, but for the prey species that they're depending on as well. They like canopy cover, so up to 50% oak woodland, madrian, evergreen forest is really good for these cats, and that's sort of the sweet spot that they've determined for them in terms of habitat type. They like rugged terrain, keeping it under 6,000 feet, so they don't seem to think they're using the very tops of our sky islands. And then the last one, minimal to no human population density. Well, no major roads, no stable nighttime lighting over really small areas. So these are things that are really important for jaguar. They think jaguar really do avoid people. Unlike mountain lion, we think of mountain lion avoiding people, but mountain lions have some adaptations to be able to be in slightly more developed areas, partially because they will go after smaller prey. So smaller animals do pretty well in more developed areas, and mountain lions can take advantage of that. Okay, so we've been talking about sky islands. Nick talked about this as well. But we can think about sort of the sweet spot on the landscape visually this way in some of our mountains. And this is a diagram that we use to explain really what a sky island is. You go from the desert floor up into the grasslands and you transition through different tree assemblages, different forest types up to the top. And so it's really this I'm trying it. Nope. There we go. Spotlight, okay, right here in this middle zone is what's considered the best for jaguar, where there's species using many of the other biome types, different ecological types across the sky islands. Some of those are shown on the right. Okay, so what does that look like? All those factors that we talked about, it rolls up into critical habitat, and that's something that is also not just scientifically based. There's a lot of human decision making that goes into this. The jaguar recovery team had a pretty diverse group of stakeholders involved in it, and this is the resulting map that came out. You're already familiar with critical habitat. Thank you, Nick, for setting the stage for what that actually means. This is a version of the critical habitat for jaguar in the Northern Recovery Unit. So what I would point out, you can recognize the big donut, the big circle one, Unit 4 and Unit 3. The Patagonia section goes from the Patagonian Mountains north up into the Santa Ritas. Unit 3 curves around, connects into the whetstones, and then that goes down to the Huachucas. Our jaguar from last year was coming up through that Unit 4. Unfortunately, this got really complicated. And under the Endangered Species Act, private individuals, companies can sue about the results of ESA. And there is a very complicated series of things that happened. And I can tell you about what happened. I can't necessarily explain why. But it started with a lawsuit from the Center for Biological Diversity. They sued over the biological opinion for Rosemont mine. They were unhappy with the fact that not enough impact was identified in that opinion about how the Rosemont mine would affect jaguar habitat. Well, Rosemont didn't like that, so they countersued. And that countersuit, so this was all in 2017, they had a cross-claim that challenged the designation of this critical habitat. So at first, in 2020, we're all about to go home and be in our house during the pandemic. An Arizona district court ruled against Rosemont. It was like, oh, okay, that happened. But then in November that year, Rosemont petitioned the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to revise the critical habitat, and that's a petition they have to respond to. So they went and did the research to see if there was sufficient evidence basically to revise the lines on the map. They didn't find that. So in September of 2021, they said we considered the petition. We don't see the scientific basis for that. And again, we thought, okay, good. The lines are staying where they are. But then an appellate court reversed part of the district court decision. and then the district court said, okay, the Fish and Wildlife Service has to vacate a portion of Unit 3 and removed subunit 4B. The small X on the right is Las Ciénegas. It's the connection between the Santa Ritas and the Whetstone Mountains. And then we're waiting, and I checked today, there was still no news. We're waiting to hear how much of Unit 3 is going to be vacated. We don't know yet. So that's expected to come out in the Federal Register at any point. It could be very small, it could be up to half of it. Those are the predictions. So we're waiting to hear what happens with that. One of the challenges with the Santa Ritas to Whetstone connector is that it's unoccupied habitat. It met so many of the variables and the need for connectivity between the Sky Islands. It was initially included, but there haven't been since listing of the species, there haven't been observations of jaguar there. We know El Jefe, back in 2011, moved between the Santa Ritas and the Whetstones. I'm not an expert on that, but I would say probably it went through there. But of course, there's no data to confirm that at this point. So I gave you a very condensed version of that story around the regulatory environment, but I highly recommend you listen to Merritt Allanen. She gave a webinar for our organization last week, and she talks about the development of the recovery plan and goes through more of the twists and turns in the regulatory story for jaguar. So if you want to get to that, you can go up to our website and look at our webinar series. Okay, so we went through what these conservation needs are, these habitat features that are good for jaguar, and I've just abbreviated them on the left-hand side. And then threats. These are the threats that are listed in the Jaguar Recovery Plan as being the major issues range-wide. The number one issue range-wide is habitat loss and degradation. Probably no surprise. And that's what I'm gonna focus on tonight. Also, border infrastructure. I'm going to talk about that. That is very much relevant to what happens for jaguar in our region. The prey overharvesting. This is an interesting one. We don't have reason to believe at the moment that that's an issue here in Arizona, but it is in Sonora, in certain places. There's more hunting of the game species, and that can lead to then, as I mentioned, the conflict with ranchers around livestock and having cattle killed and things like that. So it's not an issue necessarily in the US, but it is an issue in other parts of the jaguar range. So we'll come back to habitat loss. And then climate change is, of course, it's affecting everything. It's going to affect the productivity of the landscape that the jaguar is roaming around through. It can affect its prey species. Water coming out of the ground at springs where they need to drink. So of course, climate change is a big one. And then other issues that are more about direct mortality to jaguar. Illegal killing is a risk anywhere at any time. It's more of a problem in the southern part of the range than it is up here recently. But of course, that could change at any moment. Road mortality is an issue. Roads go through everything. The jaguar that came up into the United States had to cross Highway 2 in Sonora. big highway. Then going between the Huachuca Mountains and up to the whetstones, it crossed 82 at least twice. Makes me really nervous. So road mortality is a concern. And then of course, with any species in decline and a population that has few individuals, genetic loss, genetic diversity loss is a huge concern as well. But I'm going to focus on the border and habitat changes. Okay, so remember this map, you're experts on it, I will quiz you. So think about the red lines that I've added to the border. Those are places where we now live with a large wall, separating the habitat between the US and Mexico. We're lucky that we still have a portion of eastern Arizona that does not have wall, and that is the only reason why we've had recent jaguar sightings. I could give you an entire talk just about the history of border policy. It's one of the most fascinating things I've ever worked on. I'm going to give you just some highlights, okay? So the first border markers that were out there, you may have seen one. There's one of the historic ones down in Loquil in the San Rafael Valley, a really small monument, pretty tiny. Those were eventually, those were middle 1800s, 1848. Then there was a more official survey that was done, and the second round of border markers were put in 1891. Those are the big obelisks. You may have seen those if you've gone down to the border. What they say is you're supposed to be able to stand at one of those obelisks and be able to see east or west to the next one. And for decades, that was enough to mark the border with some cattle fencing to keep cattle organized. But those obelisks were all that we needed for a long time. Unfortunately, things really began to change in 2005. I'm sure you've heard about the Real ID Act. In that, gave the authority to waive federal law and statutes to an unelected member of government, the Secretary for the Department of Homeland Security. Those law waivers are what are endangering jaguar at the border. So with the federal laws and statutes having a simple signing of a pen allows all of the laws can be waived now at the border, and that paved the way for what's happened over the last couple of decades, which has been massive border infrastructure building projects. First wave under the Bush administration, where over 500 miles of border barrier was built, including the wall around Nogales. And then in 2009, there was a little bit more. So 2008, 2009, there was quite a bit that happened. Then the next big push, you were all around, you know what happened. Starting in 2017, we got another 450 at least miles of border wall that was built. Okay, so getting closer to what's happening now. In 2022, under the Biden administration, the border wall contracts were canceled if they were funded from the Department of Defense. That source of funding, those were deemed to be illegal, which meant all of the contracts that had been operational under the Trump administration were paused and then canceled. That was for Arizona. Then they began remediation planning, and the Tucson sector had a remediation planning process. We gave public comments on it. And the result is they heard that they're trying to make safe the border infrastructure. They recognize that some of the construction is shoddy and causing erosion issues. They're trying to stabilize that. They also said that they were going to be finishing lighting projects, and they would be closing small gaps. What's a small gap? You know, there's stretches of Arizona that aren't walled, but what's small? And they said it would be about 100 feet or less stretches of gaps. So we've been watching closely what happens with the remediation plans. And then also in 2022, we had an interesting political stunt that happened in the western Huachuca Mountains, right in the middle of where we do a lot of our research with wildlife movement, the shipping container wall that was constructed and then deconstructed. And we had wildlife cameras watching the shipping containers get set up and then having the shipping containers finally removed, and the parade of wildlife that came and investigated, we saw about a 30% decrease in animal activity around this border road area when all of the construction crews and the shipping containers were present. But luckily, those numbers went back once they pulled the equipment out. There's still a ton of restoration work to do, so that's a project we'll be working on with Coronado National Forest in the year or two ahead. But sort of a fascinating mini study of what happens when you create barriers in the middle of open habitat. Okay, so here's a schematic that shows across the greater San Rafael Valley, we have where the Santa Cruz River comes down, crosses over the border into Mexico, and the X's are vehicle barrier. Those are the low steel X's that keep vehicles from crossing, but most animals can move back and forth. So that's what the yellow bar in the middle is across the San Rafael. Red indicates where we have border wall. On the Patagonia Mountains, it's shorter wall, it's 18 feet. And then the wall in the Huachuca Mountains, there's this stupid shark fin of wall up at Montezuma Pass, that's 30 feet. Then there's the Gap of Methane, and then heading east is 30 feet, and then it transitions back down into a older section of wall, 18 feet, that runs then for 90 miles, goes back up into 30-foot wall. The height just has to do with which president put it in. But what we really love to see, of course, are animals on the move. And we love seeing this connectivity. And here's a mountain lion walking through the Huachuca Mountains. And we have over 110 wildlife cameras along about 90 miles of the border in eastern Arizona, so that we can document which species are using that habitat, where they're crossing, and where they're unable to cross. And just because you care about this area, I know as much as I do, I just want to share with you some interesting differences between the Patagonia Mountains and the Huachuca Mountains, and then of course the valley in between. We get so many birds. Light blue, that is the number of bird species that we've detected. The study is just reaching its 4-year mark right now, and the longer our cameras run, the more species show up. And we even have a yellow-billed cuckoo observation in the San Rafael Valley, which is pretty exciting. So really biodiverse area. This habitat is really important, and it's so important that the border wall does not come across here. The vehicle barrier that I mentioned is something that is fairly permeable to wildlife. And if I can get this, there we go. We've got a mule deer, mama with her fawn. They can just move right through it. And we've been looking at which species are actually able to move through the vehicle barrier. It's highly permeable. All of the large mammals that we see in this area are able to move back and forth. We see mountain lion, we see black bear, we're seeing mule deer and white-tailed deer. That's great. I mean, I'd be happy if there was nothing down there, but the fact that we have these and the animals can move back and forth across, that's really great. It's a really hopeful sign. What's not hopeful for me is the areas that do have the border wall. And this was this is a section, we have 3 hours of video of this poor black bear pacing at the border wall near the San Pedro River. And I have not seen any evidence of black bear being able to cross through the border wall itself, but we do get it going under the vehicle barrier. There's one photo floating around, someone sent it to me again today, of a black bear on the top of the border wall. That is from the same area from 2018. It's a young bear, we don't know what happened to it, but that almost never happens. So large-bodied animals are stopped in their tracks at the base of the wall. I will leave you with a little bit of hope here, though. If you can see in the photo, there's a difference between the gap in the border wall at the very bottom right-hand corner. That is a lot of money, and it would have lost. We have cameras now facing these small wildlife structures, and we'll be releasing data on this year. And we're finding they're actually effective for more species than we realized. Javelina and even mountain lion. So when animals find these and they're able to cross, I think there's factors in terms of what's on either side of the border that affects whether they'll use it and whether they find it. But there is hope that even small gaps, an inch or two wider than the normal bollard size, allows more animals to get through. Now, is a jaguar ever going to get through the wall? Maybe not. I don't think it can physically, its bone structure is not going to allow it to get that small wildlife opening, but there are floodgates that open. And I'm sharing all of this with you because I think it's so important as we think about habitat for jaguar and recovering them here. We won't be able to do that unless we keep the border permeable to jaguar and its prey species and allowing it to move back and forth. Okay, so how do we do that? Well, I work a lot on border policy. The number one thing we need to do is repeal those law waivers. As long as they're sitting there, it is a very quick act to decide to, outside of the public view, issue construction contracts and to start new border construction. There is border wall being built in the US right now, so it's happening in Texas and it's happening in California. It's not happening in Arizona except for wall gaps are closing. So that's a concern. And then we have to continue to use our data and our influence to try to get more wildlife connectivity structures installed in the border wall. I'm optimistic that there's going to be ways to do it. We have the first evidence that those small wildlife passages can work for some species, and that's better than nothing. And there was a big lawsuit that resulted in an agreement to install some larger wildlife openings, and we are hopeful that those will work. So we may have to live with segments of the wall for a long time, but there's things we can do to make it better. Okay, switching gears now a little bit closer to home. We're talking about the South 32 mine, of course. Carolyn already went into, so before I go into the water story a little bit more, I just wanted to share a reference photo. This is the Buena Vista mine in Sonora. It also used to be known as the Cananea copper mine. It's been operating for 125 years, and it is a big scar on the landscape with huge environmental issues. So very close to home, jaguars that are coming up here, they're coming around this one. There are many other mines in the region. So this is part of the gauntlet that these animals are walking around as they're moving across the landscape. And I put this map in just so you could see from a satellite image the Buena Vista mine and how big it is in the landscape down there in the bottom where Cananea is. And you can't quite see from this scale the South 32 mine. Want to keep it that way, of course. And one of the programs that we do is to do health checkups and surveys on spraying sites. And since 2020, we've surveyed with volunteers' support about 1,400 springs in the region. Here's a close-up of the area that we've been talking about today and all the springs that we visited since 2020. This is really important when we're talking about the water, the dewatering at the Hermosa mine site. The dotted line is what they've described as the cone of depression, where the water is going to be getting pumped out. Now, springs are places where groundwater naturally bubbles out of the ground. And so if you're dropping the water table, that means that water is going to be less likely to flow out of springs. So the water may be gushing in Harshaw Creek and Elm Creek, but the springs might start to run dry, and that's one of the concerns that we have. Thanks to the volunteers, probably some of you in this room, and Friends of Sonoy Creek, we were able to survey 80 springs in the area since about July last year. Now, Friends of Sonoy Creek are visiting 3 to 5 springs every week, and they are going to let us know if any of these start to go dry. So they're going to do that routine monitoring to really check on the spring's flow, and so that we can use that information to push back against the dewatering. And here's just another view of where the springs are that we've surveyed with the 2 different creeks where the water is going to be flowing out. But really, the dewatering could have an impact on many of these springs, even beyond the cone of depression. Here are the volunteers in action and some of the springs in these areas that we're concerned about, and we're going to keep making sure they get regular checks, so we're the first to know if a new problem arises. Okay, the last thing I want to talk to you is about light pollution. One of the factors that was mentioned in the Jaguar Recovery Plan about habitat quality had to do with lighting in terms of modification of the habitat. This is one of the least well appreciated issues in the environmental field, what light pollution does. But all of these species have evolved under darkness at night. And so how they can forage for food or hunt for food, their behaviors, how they communicate with one another, animals are very affected by lighting. We are affected as well. We just ignore that part, right? I'm as guilty as everyone is. I'm keeping the lights on at night on my phone too much. But there is a resource online, Light Pollution Map Info, that allows you to look at radiance that is detected from the VIR satellite, and you can look back in time and look at changes in light pollution. So in this map, where you're seeing colors, red means a lot of light pollution at night. We're looking at Nogales down at the bottom, going up the 19 corridor. And then over there near the band of colors on the legend, that's the Hermosa mine. Well, if you look at the data, the sky quality is changing pretty rapidly. And it looks like there's a 30% increase in light pollution in the last few years. So that may not be a surprise to you, but I was actually surprised it was that strong in the data. And here's what it looks like. I isolated just the areas with the town of Patagonia up in the upper left-hand corner, and then the Hermosa mine being the blob on the bottom of the screen. So this is 2020 to 2024. Now, interestingly, Patagonia's, the light pollution index, it was going down over this time period. One big caveat with this kind of data is satellites do not detect blue light. So that wavelength is not something they're picking up. So if you all are converting to LEDs and you have more blue light, it might look like there's less light pollution, but it could actually be we're just not picking up with the satellite, the blue light signal. My husband's really into this, so he made sure that I mentioned that to you. But this is interesting, and it's something to watch, because light pollution has a very long reach. It can affect things pretty far in the distance, away from the source. But it's the best environmental problem to work on because you can fix it by turning off the lights. So this is something that can be addressed, it can be modified. And there's a group down in Chile that's working on better mine lighting, basically. How to create the operational lighting that they need without causing light trespass out into the environment.
One thing that makes sense to me, that the Patagonia blob has an extension that grows over time. That's not our level. And that's where the mine
That could be it, yeah.
huge increase.
Yeah, I mean, this is measuring all of the light that could be coming out into outer space, basically. So there are things you can do to measure light pollution or sky quality on the ground, and that's really sometimes your best because the satellites are perfect. And in that blue light component, you can get a sky quality meter. It's a handheld device that you hold up. It actually measures starlight, which I absolutely love. I think that's super cool. So if you don't have a lot of light pollution, the stellar magnitude, the light coming from the stars is brighter, and it's picked up by that. You can get them for about $100. So you can do that kind of monitoring in your own community if you want to. All right, well, it's gonna go. It's one last video. I really did use restraint videos. Okay, great, yeah. So just to bring this all full circle, there's no regulatory fix for bringing Jaguar back right now. There's no way to stop the mine, given Jaguar is in our area, unfortunately. But there are so many things that we can be doing to make the habitat more friendly to wildlife. There's really nothing too small that we can do. It could be, and that's sort of what, often for me, when it feels like there's no hope for some of these environmental problems, is I think No, we just have to go back to the basics and do the stuff we always know we've had to do. We need to make sure there's habitat for these large animals, and we need to lessen the human footprint where we can. It could be shielding nighttime lights, coming out and volunteering with us. We're doing road removal and decommissioning with Coronado National Forest in the Huachucas and in the whetstones. It could be measuring spring quality. We have volunteer opportunities for everything. We process 1 million wildlife photos a year. You can help us. You can set up your own camera and submit that data to Photofauna, and we use that as a regional monitoring tool across public and private land. And I think the thing for me is I just always stay really hopeful that there's something that we can do. Every time I get a video or a photo of a remarkable animal out there, I think we're doing something right. It's still here. They're having babies. They're on the move. They're drinking from our springs. So let's keep going. Let's keep going. There's stuff we can do, and that's what keeps me doing this every day. So with that, you're welcome to contact me at this email. If you have interest in volunteering or have questions after today, you're welcome to reach out to me. And thank you.
Okay, so everybody, these different projects going after water, and we have obviously a desert state, especially in the southern area. There's work in Pierce right now because there's corporate farms that have dug the wells down so low that the population can't reach the water with their wells. They're working at the state level and I think the federal level as well on water regulations. Are we working with them at all? Would that help?
I mean, yes, the water policy issues in Arizona are super complicated across the whole West. I think I can't speak to all of it because I'm not involved in the whole breadth of water policy. The one issue that we've been working on is the Supreme Court gutted the Clean Water Act last year, and so many ephemeral waters lost protection. So we think about 1/3 of the springs in Arizona lost federal protection from that. These are things that we need to work, obviously, to fix and to hopefully bring back into protection. We've been working with Arizona Department of Environmental Quality to get springs added to their surface water protection list, nominate springs. So we take all the spring seeker data and we say, these are things we should protect. It should help protect them from things like pollution from mining. So it has to be big impacts, but things like that, those are just an example of things that we're trying to work on. And there's a coalition of folks that are looking at other issues of water policy. But there's a lot of corporate pressure, it's very political. So it's a super tough one, but I think for all of our futures, we have to be thinking about it.
One of the comments is light showing the color depression. I could see a dotted line. It looked like a perfect circle.
Yeah, this is what the mine said it is. So I don't have any other information about that.
Well, you see the nuclear model.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, I'll go back to that. Yeah, this is in no way, I'm sure this is inaccurate. It's more just the idea of which springs we think are closest to the center of the problem spot. But yeah, how far away it's going to have impacts, and that's where I think monitoring as many of these water sources across the landscape over time is going to be pretty important.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, to Ben's statement too about the water concerns. Our larger picture here for all of us is to speak up to our elected officials and get these regulations we are doing. The good news, and I really want to share the good news, is you have heard from two scientists today about work in critical fields. You have heard from Calabasas Alliance and from ARA. There are incredible numbers of people on the ground working together to make a difference for our regions. And I would just ask that you please go to both Calabasas Alliance website, to ARA's website, and to support all that Sky Island is doing. And this great yellow bell cuckoo will go out and